Are there any other famous instances of this? I'm trying to remember.
We tried to make famous recently Joe Garcia picking his earwax and eating it.
You did make that famous.
You did a very
Pretty good job. It has
with
2.5 million YouTube views.
Oh my God.
Okay, what's the story? How'd you find that?
This is like really one of the saddest stories. We have about 40 nerds now who work in DC.
Do you call them nerds?
I do for the full-time nerds. And one of the nerds was sitting at home on a Sunday and had C-SPAN on, and was sitting at his computer doing research, and C-SPAN was on in the background, not soccer or not the World Cup, but C-SPAN. And he looked up at the TV and he saw it. He saw it live. He saw Joe Garcia pick his earwax, look at it, and then put it in his mouth. And then he immediately emailed the war room, was like, we need to pull the video of C-SPAN from the last 5 minutes.
So is the lesson someone's always watching, or is the lesson don't be disgusting anyway?
No, the lesson is don't have a life. Watch C-SPAN too. I'm curious how excited his email was to you.
So
guys.
excited.
He's like so many exclamation points. Like, you will not believe what I just
Have you
said.
seen the Garcia video? All caps. Mm-hmm.
So this is actually segues pretty nicely into the question for you too that I had coming in, which is, at what point in your careers did you realize that you had totally lost your souls?
That was a horrible segue.
Was it?
Yeah.
No, I think it was appropriate. If you're up at Sunday night looking at earwax videos and deciding how to destroy a politician's career based on picking his ear, do you question your life choices at that point or no?
No, I think it's fun.
Okay. Why?
I mean, it's like your chosen field, the same way, like, why does a basketball player like to play basketball? That's what they do. Like, you're never like, oh, do you get bored throwing that orange ball around all the time? My basketball career peaked at like 5th grade when everyone else kept growing and I stopped.
I know how that is.
I'm curious too, though, like how you get into it. It's a special field.
Yeah. I mean, did you know at a certain time that this was going to be your lifestyle, that you were just going to...
Like, how do you even know it exists as a field when you're at a formative age at 16 or 17?
I had no idea that of the dark arts of opera research.
I didn't until I got my first one dumped on me. Or gifted
handed to me.
Handed to me.
Did someone do opera research on you? No.
No, actually, should we do this or should we do this first?
No, I like that question.
One of you go. You go first, because the question was initially to you.
Sure. I mean, I think I didn't more get into it as like I'm into research per se. Like I just kind of started working on campaigns. I think pretty much everybody either starts as you're a field staffer or you're a finance staffer, which either way means you just sit there and call people all day. And like it's basically like your entry level job. You got to like make your bones and like put your time in, and then you just kind of move up to different things. So I ended up being more interested in communications. Started doing that, and then that's where you kind of first meet the research folks that are providing a lot of kind of the materials. And I think kind of, it's just like fun. Like you watch Law and Order and you're a kid, like you're investigating stuff. It's just kind of interesting.
Do you get like a particular high when you find a really good piece of apple, like someone picking their hair?
It's super lame, but yeah.
Yeah. Is that true?
I knew I wanted to be an opera researcher in 5th grade when a fellow named Chris was bullying me in class. I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding.
Like, that's it.
Put together a file on him.
Yeah, put together a file on him, got it to the principal. It's pretty big. It was pretty big time. Waited for Monday morning. He didn't get to go to. He was banned for recess for 2 weeks. So I had the basketball court to myself. I do get a high because it's fun. Why wouldn't you get a high? It could be lame, but it is pretty fun to actually see tangible results. I think that was one thing. Like Eddie said, I started doing field staff work too, and I hated it. I thought for the first part it was just mind numbing to have to go through and call people to try to turn out voters. It just wasn't. Not that opera research is particularly intellectually challenging, but it's more intellectually challenging than that was. But two, there was you didn't see any results. There was no instant grat, and there's tons of instant gratification in opera.
All right, I've been waiting for this.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, I feel like it might be anticlimactic now. Well, I was a cub reporter. I was working in Plant City, Florida, for my first full-time job.
The Plant City Journal.
The Tampa Tribune, and I was covering a.
Wait, hold on. Is the Plant City Journal a real thing? You meant the Register. Okay.
I was covering a state legislative campaign, and I got like a mysterious note from someone that was like I mean, this was it's a Medina story, but this was like in the old days before the BlackBerries, and I don't even think I had a pager yet. I know there was a time, I didn't have an email account. and I got a couple of interesting, suspicious notes followed by an invitation to come meet me somewhere for breakfast, and it was someone from the opposing campaign of the guy who the hit was on.
Wrote you a letter and mailed it.
I think I finally got a phone call after all this flirtation, asking me to meet for breakfast, and I sat down with the person I was having breakfast with, and was handed literally a binder with like the goods, and before this began, was asked a series of questions like, "How's your father, insert name, doing?" Like, totally had the lowdown on me from top to bottom before we sat down, and I realized at that point that I was in the hands of a very dangerous.
Was that Rick Wilson?
It was actually a little horrifying. It was actually horrifying.
Did you write the story?
It was, yeah. I mean, it was a really good. It was.
I had opera research on me too when I was doing the Edwards story. I know I had a campaign come up to me and start asking me questions about where I'd gotten the news of this strange videographer who had disappeared from the web and all that stuff, and very personal questions that only someone who had been doing research on me would know, and I felt a little bit sort of violated.
Right. I mean, that was the experience I had. I thought, is this person trying to intimidate me into doing this story, or are they just trying to show me that they're not messing around? I think it was the latter. I don't really care. I mean, I wouldn't have done a story anyway if I thought it was,
No, but it's still a little nerve-wracking, right? Yeah.
But I think that when you're getting a tip from somebody who you trust, who you come to trust, and you have the ability to check it out yourself and take it a couple steps further and to kind of fill in the gaps that you need to know, like, well, what about the next email, or what about the email before it, or whatever, then it can be a tremendously valuable thing.
Well, I have a theory that like 90% of opposition research is basically crap.
It is.
It is.
I mean, the stuff that I'm given, I would say 90% of it is crap. And I got my start in opposition research.
Gems, Terkel. Gems.
You've had a good batting rate so far. No, it's been pretty good so far.
No, but I mean, it's all this it's disposable, right? I mean, you get it. It's like a quick hit, but no one will remember a good
Or some of it's not. I mean, honestly, a lot of it too is just not a story.
Yeah.
If bad people who are sending you opposition research in a bad way, which is not you two, will just say, hey, Mitt Romney, people are talking about, him on taxes, and here's just a sheet of everything he's ever said on taxes. That's not really a story.
Right, it's not actual research.
Good opposition researchers know what to do with it and how to create a story rather than just giving you a document.
I always say to the kids that are just starting doing research for us, like, well, yeah, they're kids. They're like 23. We get them from Dartmouth, and Harvard. You want the smart ones. They're smart, so they're able to find the information. But the problem is a lot of times they confuse a talking point from an actual piece of opposition research.
What is a good hit, a good story that wounds a candidate, and I thought that was a little bit silly because it's a high school kid, and I did stupid shit in high school all the time that I would regret, and I do regret.
You want to tell us?
This is not a confessional. However, I'm assuming you probably love that story.
Yes, I mean, it was an interesting story. Like, it chased headlines for a day or two, but I think, like you said, that it's a tangential issue. So I think when you're looking at opposition research, the key is that, there are some things that are obvious, like legitimate rape, or you didn't pay $1 million in taxes. Like, that's blindingly obvious. Yeah. But what you more want is you want to find stories that advance your storyline or your kind of main theme that you're trying to make in the case. So sure, the high school stuff took him off message for a day or two, but better research is Bain stuff, tax shelter, stuff like that, because that was going to our central theme against Romney, that, he's out of touch.
My point is the Mitt story probably would have hurt Christie more, right?
It's so funny. I was just thinking that because it goes to the theme, right?
Nobody thinks Mitt is a bully, right? I mean,
Mitt
had like 30 grandkids.
They thought he was privileged.
Nice guy, Mormon, doesn't drink
but
a beer.
But it's a question of whether he's out of touch or whether you always understand the impact that your actions have on other people.
Does that make you out of touch? That when you were in high school, you
if you were doing bullying activities without realizing that's what you were doing. Like, I wasn't a bully. I cared about everybody. Yeah, but you didn't realize you really
but you pinned down a kid and snapped off his hair or something.
I feel like for that story, people who already didn't like him or like, this is why I don't like him, and people who liked him, didn't care. I mean, I think a more effective personal story was the Scott Desjardins story, the congressman from Tennessee who was very pro-life, and it ends up that, when he was a doctor, he forced his mistress to have an abortion. That, I think, is a very damning personal story, and perhaps was the kill shot. He did win.
Yeah, I was going to say he got reelected.
He did get reelected, but considering, how much he was reelected by in a very conservative district, people turned against him, and, now he's not doing anything.
What about Hillary? How do you do Oppo research on someone who's been around?
I have this question written down. That's a great question.
Thank you.
Well, I think that there are kind of two levels to it, right? On the first level, there is an element of, old stuff is new again in a news cycle if you can make it relevant, right? And I think that, I'm trying to think of a good example of this, but if something is going on in the news that reflects something that she did in the past, right? Like then all of a sudden that history is relevant again. So you do have to go back and look through her whole record from the 90s. I was looking at today at some piece of Oppo about how everybody's going to chuckle, but one of the people from Travelgate, right, ended up being audited by the IRS like a couple weeks later, and it was a mini scandal back then, right? And so then Hillary goes on Fox with Greta this week and says, "Oh, the IRS thing is a serious scandal, which we should look at it." Well, given that, I think that brings kind of new light onto the issue from the 90s. So I mean that's
you have
one.
To make yourself go back and do this homework, but it can't be as exciting as like kind of fresh meat, right? If you have like a new candidate who nobody knows anything about, that's got to be more.
Well, yes, yeah, certainly. But I think that with Hillary, there's a lot of fresh meat too when it comes to the financial stuff. And they, when they left the White House, as she'll tell you, they were dead broke and she had no money, and they now are worth over $100 million. Yeah,
Bloomberg just did this.
But a lot of that was a 2008 story. I remember writing about Bill's speaking circuit.
But it's gone steroid. CGI has grown so much since then. Though. Yeah. In 2007, that was a little bit of a ragtag deal. I mean, they've expanded a lot since then. And there's the whole time of then in 2008, there wasn't an element of what did she do to help these big CGI donors, which then does come into play at the State Department.
And I think, obviously Tim and I disagree on this entirely, and probably everything. But, I think,
we'll come up with a couple of things.
We'll find something.
But, I think that gets a little bit back to what you were saying about, fitting the theme or the message of the campaign. When you're talking about out-of-touch people who are loaded, everybody believes that about Mitt Romney. I don't think that people believe that about the Clintons. The other thing that you'll got is,
All right.
I mean, you can look at Bill Clinton passing minimum wage, helping people. The Clintons don't advocate policies like that. So I don't think that
this isn't a talking points for him, Eddie. What are you trying to say?
I'm trying to say that I think
taking advantage of every legal shelter and shield for their money. It doesn't mean it's illegal, but it means it's interesting if you're
right. But I do think that you're going to have a lot harder trouble trying to frame the Clintons as.
Let's phrase it this way. As someone who is going to defend the Clintons, what do you think are the chief vulnerabilities? What are the things that make you most nervous?
I mean, I'm actually not that nervous. I mean, I think like Tim said, you can bring stuff back up again. Yeah. Sure, there's news hooks here and there. If folks want to talk about Travelgate and Vince Foster, that's cool with me. I'm totally fine with that.
If you're getting a pitch from an opposition researcher, what is convincing for you? How do you need them to be like this is just exclusive, or do you need something more?
Records, a real lead that I can follow, enough time to pursue it instead of at some dicey time window where it's just you don't feel good about
30
it.
minutes.
That's right, but I'm gonna jump in on a tangent on behalf of the poor press people who you guys pull the trick of, hey, I have to file in 20 minutes. Do you want to comment, or I'm gonna file the story without you?
Yeah, I know. No one's saying it's fair.
I'm
no
sorry,
one's saying
Eddie.
it's fair. Those are the kind of things I probably if it's really complicated or major stuff, I probably want to sit down in person instead of doing it by email or over the phone. I want to be able to ask questions. I want to have a gut feeling that I'm comfortable with it and that it's not just that it's documentable. If it's documentable, if I can take what I'm learning and do my own homework and take it a couple steps further, then I feel great about it. I'm fine with where it comes from.
I've got an opposition research that, I mean, like Margaret was saying, you have to look into it yourself. And that's why it's very frustrating when you are told that you have to claim this in half an hour or it's gone. Because I've gotten a lot of opposition research that when I look into it, it's just been absolutely wrong and it will make you look really silly. One thing that has changed, as I've been reporting, is you get a lot more video. And I think that's really great. And it can be older video. It can be secret video, obviously, if everyone knows 47%. The Todd Aiken video was just, it was you guys, right? Sitting around watching local news. No one was paying attention. It was, I think, pitched on a Saturday or Sunday because I ended up, getting it while I was moving apartments on the weekend. So I didn't get to write about it. But, one thing that frustrates me is when I get video is that if it's the quote and it seems juicy, but it's only like a 10-second quote, you need to make sure you
there's
have
so many
context.
people who run partial quote APA research.
And you'll get hit for it. Someone else has the
Benghazi
video.
stuff that's been problematic
Really?
for covering the Benghazi stuff. Sure,
What do you mean?
absolutely. Well, part of it's that the White House themselves were not very good about, or the administration about responding fully to questions and that sort of stuff. But also, if on a foreign policy story, if part of what you're dealing with is either classified or kind of in that gray area, then you can have some information and think it's saying something and go to the other side and ask them to clarify it, and they can't. Or maybe they can. Maybe they're penned in. Maybe they're just pretending they're penned in. Yeah. It gets kind of dicey. It's hard to know. And you don't want to look past a good story, but you don't want to get played either.
I've been wanting to talk about the Hillary squirrel. Who? Yeah, I mean, who gets that job? That has got to be the worst job in politics, to have to go out in a squirrel uniform and badger Hillary Clinton. Right? Does it get lower than that?
I mean, that's always interns. One of your first jobs usually is they stick you in the car.
Is it Tim? Are you under the squirrel?
I'm everywhere. Okay? I'm everywhere.
Tweeting from
I'm wherever Hillary is, I am, and that will be the case.
Do you know who the squirrel is?
I've not met the human inside the squirrel. No, it's an intern.
Sounds like a non-denial denial.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm good at that. I appreciate the question.
Have either of you ever had to play the role of mascot? Because it's a really
Have you?
believe.
No, definitely not. When?
You've been a mascot?
I'm trying to think. I'm pretty sure that either in
yes.
college or my first job right after college, I was a toxic waste barrel at some environmental protest with the straps.
No, you were
in the
just doing that
barrel.
for fun. Yeah. It was more of a
Can you elaborate a little bit on this? What was the?
I think it was. I believe it was some super fun the toxic waste cleanup thing, and I had the actual lobbyist or person talking about it, and they made the interns put on toxic waste barrel costumes, and that was also too. In
Was
my
that the
hippie
most
days when I
demeaning
had,
thing
long
you've ever
hair.
done in your life?
Probably not. Yeah.
And you just stand there and you
Yeah, you're
have to
just a prop.
say, will you chant things?
No, you just stand there and look like a barrel.
Oh my god, that's so sad. I was gonna.
Now, you know whose fault the costumes are, and that's
West
you.
Wing?
It's you people.
Oh,
And
come
it's because you guys love it. The squirrel was
Don't
all
polar bear.
over Twitter.
Love that
The
guy.
squirrel was all over Twitter. I'll tell you, one of my best
cares if it's
moments
over
was
Twitter?
putting. I put the when Romney in 2008 when I was working for McCain versus Romney, and we had the dolphin that would follow him around, and then right, and then he and then Romney.
She's proving your
She
point.
loves it. And then Romney flip-flopped. So the dolphin was starting to get less attention, and then Romney flip-flopped on an immigration issue. So we put the dolphin in a sombrero and had him be Senor Flipper. Came out to the next event. That was Senor Flipper was on the front page of the Washington Post in the lead. He was in the lead.
No way.
Yes.
It was. I totally remember
It
that.
was Mitt Romney went
Must
to
have been a Sunday
Iowa where he was
afternoon.
followed
Now, the question
by.
is, do you remember who was in the dolphin costume?
I do.
Who?
Well, I mean, a kid who went to Iowa State at the time.
I had a follow-up question. I was saying, the question was, can you ever have that task and become someone of consequence?
Yes.
The other thing I want to talk about is October surprises, because there's this theory that.
Stupid.
Thank you. Right? Is there
Stupid.
such a thing as an October surprise?
No, they're dumb. And if you look at I was actually just, I forget who else, I was talking to the Swedish moderate party came to see America Rising a couple weeks ago because they wanted to learn about the American political ways, right? And so, I was just
You're huge in Sweden.
To emulate
huge.
them or to do the opposite?
emulate. And I was just dropping some,
Sweden.
I was just dropping some knowledge on
Suddenly
the
Sweden
Swedes.
becomes really vicious.
And they were
Don't corrupt their society, Tim. They're a good country.
They're not. Based on my
They have
based on
socialized healthcare.
based on my one meeting, they're not. They have a dark side, a dark underbelly.
Wow.
And
This
the
is being
Swedes-
published, but I just want you to know this is not going to be
Trust
between
me,
us.
nobody in Sweden is watching this show.
Well,
People on Twitter are like, no.
was that supposed to be a C? I don't know. What would I be worried about? Now you have me worried. I wasn't before. So here's the story. The Swedes We're asking about just that. When do we deploy our opposition research? And they even were familiar with the American phrase "October surprise." It wouldn't necessarily be an October surprise in Sweden.
What are your elections?
It's a
York and Ford surprise.
Yeah, exactly. And I was telling them that no, it's ridiculous. It doesn't work. What you want the exact opposite, which is what Eddie and folks did to Mitt Romney last time. You want to give. You want to give the oppo time to, seep in.
Like
to
an
the
August surprise. Like, when do you want to hit? Like August 10th?
Yes.
Well, it depends. Like I said, it depends. And if it's a one day, it depends on if it's a one day thing, then sure. Like, and if it's a Hail Mary, like the Bush DUI, whatever. But that didn't work, Yeah. If it's the core research that's defining your campaign, which is pretty much what the Bain stuff was to the Obama folks, they started that in June, which was right. Like, you needed time for it to work.
And that was the example I was going to say. Actually, the Bush DUI is probably going to be the last attempted, like, October surprise forever. It did move some numbers. It didn't work.
Yeah, I always thought it moved. I thought it did
move numbers, but not enough. But the other biggest thing too, besides the timing and all that, is now with early voting, with vote by mail,
That's a great point.
there is no even if you wanted to drop something right before the election day, there is no more election day.
The Mitt documentary was a good example of this. Like, one of the things that just drove me crazy when that Mitt documentary came out was all of these reporters who were on the Mitt bus. So, like, why didn't we just see more of Mitt like that on the campaign trail? Like, this is so ridiculous. Like, the Mitt, what would have happened in a real campaign is that somebody like Eddie would have found the two stupidest things that Mitt said in the Mitt documentary. Yeah. He would have immediately sent it out. He would have immediately sent it out to all of the Mitt reporters who would have written stories on those two parts before they even watched the full movie, and then Morning Joe, Sam would have been on the next morning talking about the dumbest thing that Mitt said in the Mitt video, and so there wouldn't have been this whole like humanizing kind of conversation.
Because I was thinking, and also too, I think like part of it is like the game, like as the wire, like you do it, but then like I think like. Afterwards, I think everybody gets like a little bit of nostalgia, a little bit looking about it. Because I guarantee you, when I watched that video, like I was like, he actually seems pretty nice, and like I didn't feel like bad.
He called me up. He said
I didn't feel bad, and it didn't stop me to quit my job. But like I felt like a little bit bad. I'm like, this guy actually seems pretty nice. Yeah.
On the topic of doing oppo research on your own candidate, who has to like go present that book to the candidate, and how uncomfortable is that conversation?
I think it can be pretty uncomfortable.
Depends on the candidate.
Yeah, it depends on the candidate. I mean, I think it depends.
Is it the chief of staff who has to sit down?
Usually, I mean, the good thing that the researchers usually get saved for is like you do all the work, but then it gets kicked up to somebody who gets paid a lot more than you that has to like deal with the candidate yelling at them.
We know about the prostitute.
Right. I think, there's two things. Like, all of their issue stuff is a pain in the ass. They'll complain. You're being
that's a
unfair,
separate thing to.
But when you're like looking for like stuff, the personal stuff they did is where like it gets weird, and like no matter how many times you tell them like just tell you everything up front, it'll be easier. Like a lot of they try to hide something or they try to do it, and like and it's also even weirder I think with family. Like when it's not about the candidate themselves, but it reflects on them. Their brother did something weird, or
if there's other family in the discussion.
That always
also
weird,
gets awkward.
Well, I don't want to make it too personal, but did Edwards, did the staff know in advance about the affair before?
What do you mean?
I mean, did you find out from the Inquirer or from media inquiries, or did you know before?
There's varying timelines of varying people of what they say.
All right, fair enough. All right, so just to recap, opposition research, costumes like barrels and chickens and earwax, basically, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh yeah, that's the fun stuff.